Let's wait until that starts up. Okay. Okay, so I sent you a sample set of questions. And so we're going to go over that today. Okay. Let me share my screen now. Is Redux on the midterm? Yes, it is. Okay, let me pop this out. All right, there's my chat. And let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen? All right, let's go over this midterm. Well, these are all sample questions from several midterms. And let's go over each one of these. And let me see if I can. I won't be able to see the chat. Okay, there we go. Now I can see the chat too. Okay. All right. So a couple things. Yeah. So the looks like the server has been acting up, and it was crashing over the weekend. And so we're gonna make the we're gonna move the due date for the for assignment 4. We're gonna move it to Wednesday, just to give everybody a little more time, because the server was unavailable for a day or so, and been going up and down. So I'm working on fixing that. So I'm just gonna give everybody just a couple more days. Also the midterm, we're gonna move it to the weekend. So that it'll be made available, say Friday, all the way through Monday, so that you'll have this whole week to prepare, and you can take it then this weekend. Yeah, we'll make available all the quizzes, and if you have a missing assignment, great. Please reach out to the TAs. I'll reach out to them as well, see what's going on. Let's see. Other than that, yeah. Other than that, on Wednesday, the day that the assignment is due, we're also going to get started on the next assignment. We'll get it going. Although we will give you some time, some more time to work on it, since there's been some shifting in the dates. Okay. On the midterm, any questions before the midterm? Let's see, Professor. So the midterm will be available Friday morning, and we'll go through till Monday at midnight. All right. So you'll have a good 1, 2, 3, 4 days to take a look at it. All right. Let's go over this these set of questions, and these are representative with the kinds of questions you should expect from the upcoming exam. So the first one, let's see if I can view thumbnails now. Hide sidebar. There we go. So this first question asks, which of the following options creates a form element with initial date whose initial date is set to the end of World War II, September 2nd, 1945? There's a question on the chat. What's the time constraint for the midterm? So usually it'll be like 3 hours long. Well, you'll have 3 hours to do the exam, but I don't think you'll need 3 hours. Will we see the rubric on Canvas for A4? Just go by the whatever's in the document. If it's in the document, it would be on the rubric. The document is the rubric. Okay, so this just basically checks to see if you understand the formatting of the input field, and so notice that they're all inputs except this one, dates. And so there is no date input field, right? There's an input field whose type is date. Okay, so there's no such thing as input and then date equal to something. So that's no good. And so these two are definitely not the answer. And most of my questions will be like this, where two of the answers of the multiple choice are obviously wrong, and the last two are not quite sure, right? They're very similar to each other, and you have to decide which one is better. Okay, so this one and this one are obviously wrong, again, because there's no date input and there's no date attribute. So it's between these two. And the only difference between the two is the value, right? This value is year, month, day, and this is, I guess, month, day, year. Okay, so basically this is testing to know if you know what the correct format for setting the value of a date input field, and it's this one, right? The standard is to have year, four characters for year, dash, 2 characters for month, dash, and 2 characters for the day. The actual rendering on the field depends on the locale where you are in the world. It will use your browser's location, right, to render it differently on the screen. But nevertheless, the format of setting the value always is year, month, day. Okay. Then here we have fill in the blanks to create a proper HTML document. Okay, so it says, make sure to use correct spelling, use correct capitalization, use correct punctuation, use best practices. So here we have H1 main content. This is the title. So this is kind of giving you a hint of what you should, right? So this should be like the title. If this is the title, this is the title. Notice that this is a closing tag. Excuse me. This is a closing tag. So the only way for this to be a title and this be a closing tag, then that means that this has to be the head, right? The HTML documents, remember, has a head and a body, right? So if this is a title, then this is title, right? Title. And this has to be head. So if this is head, then this must be the opening head. So this must be the HTML tag, right? If this is the closing of the head, then this must be the body, and this is a closing body, and this is a closing HTML, right? So again, this is just testing whether you know your very basics formatting of the HTML of an HTML document. Let's say, so which of the following options implements a set of radio buttons that are mutually exclusive? Right. So if you remember, there are two types of, well, there are a whole bunch of types of buttons, but the ones that are either radio or checkboxes, right? The ones that are either circular or square, right? You have radio and you have checkboxes, and radio buttons are meant to be mutually exclusive, meaning that you're going to choose one value out of multiple choices. Okay, whereas checkboxes are meant for where you want to select several options, right, that are equally likely. And so yeah, so radio buttons are usually mutually exclusive, whereas checkboxes are not mutually exclusive. The other thing is that if you have radio buttons, the only way to know for a radio button to know that it needs to, if you select one, it needs to turn off the other, right? So if you have 3 radio buttons, how would they know that if you select one, it has to unselect the others because they're mutually exclusive. The only way to do that is that they have to share the same name, not ID, not ID. Okay, so the same name. If two radio buttons have the same name, they know that they are mutually exclusive. They create what is called a radio button group, right? And you can have multiple groups, right? So you can have a group of radio buttons that deals with, you know, whether I'm male or female, and then another one down below that says whether I'm married or single. Okay, and so the whether I'm male or female, they themselves would be mutually exclusive amongst each other, and then but then the ones where I'm married or single, they also would be mutually exclusive amongst themselves, but they're not mutually exclusive across groups. And the way you create a group is by using the same name for that group. Okay, so these are mutually exclusive. So yeah, so let's see the answers, the options, right? So here we have yes and no. So married, yes, no. Because this looks promising, right? They have the same name, perfect, and the type is radio, perfect. Radio here, there is no such element called radio, right? So this is obviously wrong. These two are definitely wrong. So the last two, it's between this one and this one. Notice that the only difference between the two is that for this one, we're using name, right, to say that they're grouped somehow, they're grouped together. Whereas here we're using IDs, the same name, the same ID for both. Well, even if we didn't remember that it was name to make them mutually exclusive, right? We know that IDs, right, by definition, they need to be unique tokens, right? So you can't have the same ID multiple times in the same page. That makes no sense. So that's also just scratches that one. So definitely it needs to be the first one. Okay. All right, so let's do another one here. It says, consider the following reducer and component which have been correctly configured. Okay, so this brings me another point, is that I'm not going to deliberately make a mistake or syntax error just to try to fool you. Okay, so this one does not contain any errors. So this was an example of a reducer and component that is testing you whether you understand how data flows between a component and a reducer and the state management and so on and so forth, right? So let's look at a reducer. Let's see, we have here is a reducer. So this is the name of the function. B and C, presumably those should be what? The state and the action. And it's returning, notice that it's always returning the same thing. It's returning D, so state variable D, whose value is always C.E. Okay, so that's what it's returning. So the state is always, right, a variable D whose value is C.E. And C is the action. See that? So the action presumably has an E attribute in there. So we need to figure out what that E is. Okay, so down below in the component, right, we have a connect, right? And the connect is connecting this function over here. There it is, right? Connect is connecting this function. And remember, the first argument to that function is the state to property mapper, whereas the second one is the dispatch to property mapper. And those are the two functions up here. See that? So this one is the state to property mapper, and this is the dispatch to property mapper. Right? So M must be the state, and O must be dispatch. Okay. Okay. And what the state is doing, the state is saying, I'm going to inject, right, property G with the value of M dot of state.d, state.d. Okay, is there a D? Oh yeah, there is a D in the state. See that? That has the value of C.E. And what does the state map, what does the dispatch do? The dispatch mapper is taking the dispatch and it's passing to dispatch. The type is P, whatever that is. Now, does the type matter at all? Well, no, it doesn't matter, right? Because see, our reducer is not even looking at the type, right? It's not even looking at the type. It's always returning C.E, regardless of what the type is, right? So whatever type we pass in, it doesn't really matter. We do pass in, if the action triggers, if this action triggers, we are passing E, right? A value E, who's an attribute to the action E, whose value is P, and P is some attribute, some argument to the function, right? So E.P. So this E here, E, what's the value of E? It's gonna be whatever P is here, whatever P is here. So whoever calls this function I. Okay, where's the action? Where's the action here? Let's look at the component. The component, why don't M and O have to be within parentheses? Asking a syntax helps with recognition of parts. So why don't M, okay, M here and O have to be within parentheses? Okay, yeah, so that's part of the syntax, right? In ES6, in the new version of JavaScript, if a function has a single parameter, then the parentheses is optional. Okay, you see it here again. See that? This is a function. There's a function. See that? And P is a parameter, that function, and we're not passing we're not putting in parentheses. Okay. All right. So let's try and figure this out. Let's see. So here's a function that implements the component. It's our component F. It's just a function. There it is, F right here. That's what's being connected. And it has two properties. It has the property G and the property I. The property I. Okay, so G is equal to H at the beginning. And this and the only thing that it has is a button. Right? It has a button that's going to call I, and it's going to, so here I, you passing me that function I, and we're going to pass you J. And notice G here. So at first, G is H. So this renders as H at the very beginning. So the button, when it renders, the button renders H. Okay. So the only, at first, just the button just renders H, right? But then I click it. When I click it, I'm calling I and I'm passing J, right? So here's I. I'm passing J here. So P is equal to J. Right, so the type is J and E is J also, right? So E is J. So this calls the reducer with E equal to J. So here's the reducer. So here's the action that has the E whose value is J. So D at the end has the value of J, which here in the state, we're extracting that variable D that has the value J and is being injected to the attribute, the property G. So this property G is getting J. Okay, so at first the button is rendering as H, but then when you click it, it changes to J. Basically, that's it, right? So the question was, the button's text before it's being clicked, the answer is H, right? Because it's initialized as H. But after you click it, right, it changes to J. Make sense? So you should expect puzzles like this, right? That ask you what happens after you click this button once and then you click this button twice, right? And you should be able to follow along, right? How the everything maps together, how everything is plumbed. Make sense? All right, here's another example. Consider the code snippet. I think this is another puzzle. It says, consider this code snippet below. what does H1 render when you click on the following buttons in the following order? Okay, presumably we have two buttons, A and B. Okay, let's see. Here's a component. Okay, presumably this is a reducer. Here's a reducer. Here's a reducer. There's our state with an initial state, empty state. Here's the action. Here's the action that type, and the type can be either A or S. And if it's A, it returns the state of the action that has attributes A plus B or subtraction. So we already guessed that this might be something to do with addition and subtraction, presumably. So the component has a value of C, right? Oh, sorry about that. Let's see. Notice that by default, right? Notice that the state is S. S is empty. That means that when this loads at first, right? Let's see what's going on here. Let's see. This is C. Do we have a value for C? Do we have a value for C? C, when it first loads, C is mapped to S.C, but there is no C, right? There's no C, so it's empty at first. Okay, so anyway, so when we click on this, at first we call A with a 5 and a 6, right? So we call this function A with a 5 and a 6, and that is mapped here. There's A with a 5 and a 6, and we say, well, this is 5 and this is 6, right? And the type is A. That means that we fall here with a 5 and a 6. So 5 and 6, right? That's 11. So C gets 11. Okay, the state retrieves the 11 and it maps it to a attribute called C. So C is 11, right? So this is 11. So when you click on A, C turns to 11. If you click B after that, if you click B, then we call S, right, with a value of 7 and 5. So this is 7 and that's 5. And we go here, right, with a 5, with a case with the type S, right, with 7 and 5. And we return 7 minus 5. That's a 2. Okay, that's a 2. And so we retrieve the 2 here. We map it to C, and C becomes 2. Right, so it was 11, and then it became 2. Make sense? So this is 11, and that's 2. Again, you should expect, some kind of puzzle like this, where you're asked what happens when you click on this here and there. Make sense? Here's another question, right? Here's another puzzle. Consider the following React reducer. Let's see, is there a question? Professor, I might be mistaken, but I think you said the other day that midterm will contain content only up to React, not Redux. Did I say that? I think that was for the quiz, not the midterm. Yeah, that was for the quiz, not the midterm. Yeah. Okay, so let's consider. So, all right. So here's another puzzle. Consider the following React reducer component whose snippets which have no syntax. Okay. Here's another one. So here's a reducer. And okay, so who is on first? Okay, so this returns what? This is a reducer. So this presumably is the state, right? And that's the action. And it returns what? It always returns the same thing. It returns that says it returns a state variable whose variable on is either, depending on the type of the action, right? If it is base, then it returns the variable 10 plus, you increment it, or decrement it, okay? Or otherwise, right, so it returns just one or the other. It returns one or the other. Okay, down below here, right, we have a component called lorem, and it receives these three attributes. This first attribute is just data that we're extracting presumably from the state, whereas the two other ones are functions that we can call, right? So that we can if we click on dummy, right, we invoke the is function, or if we click on text, we invoke the simply function. Okay. And here's our connector. So lorem is our component, right? There's a state mapper and there's the dispatch mapper. So when we click on, so what's the question number one? So what does H1 element render when the component first mounts? What does the H1 render when the component first mounts? All right, let's see. So meaning we need to know what ipsum is. What's ipsum? Right? What data do we have for ipsum? Let's see, let's look at the state. The state is extracting from the state, is extracting the variable on, and it's mapping it to ipsum. Okay, so we need to know what on is. Okay, so on comes from where? Comes from the initial state over here. Okay, notice that on is 10 at first. Okay, and so this at first it runs. Is the type equal to base? Well, no, because nobody clicked on it, right? So it has no initial value for type, right? So it's definitely not this. It's the decrement, right? So it decrements this, and it returns for on, returns the initial 10 minus 1 is 9. We extract it from the state, and we tie it to ipsum. So this is 9 at first. That's 9 at first. And then the question is, what does H1 element render after clicking the first button twice? After clicking the first button twice. So this one, twice. Okay, so if we click on is here, right? It's this one, right? And we are basically calling the dispatcher with the type of base, right? So we come here, the type is base, right? So type is base. So if it is base, then we increment on, right? It becomes 9 plus 1 is 10. If we click it again, it'll be 11, right? So this becomes 11. Could you explain why we should consider the decrement when the component first mounts? Yeah, so what happens is that if you remember the Professor, is mount here means first call. Yeah, it means when this first loads, what happens is that the reducers, all the reducers are invoked at first, right? That's why you need to have a default. Remember I said that it's always a good practice to have a default in all your reducers, meaning that your reducer should always evaluate to something, right? Even if you don't know what the any actions or any events, right? They should have an initial default, okay? Because all the reducers are invoked when the provider, right? When the provider is going to provide the state to all the components inside of the provider, right? It needs to know what the current state is, because all the components inside that are connected want to know what the initial state is that are going to be mapped into their properties, right? So the only way that the provider can know what the states is for all the reducers to run, right, and initialize whatever state they have, and that then trickles down to all the components that are inside. Okay, so So when before even the component runs, before the component and I ever get to the component, right? All the reducers have executed, and they all have provided their state, right? And that provider is going to take that store that is provided, that is populated by the reducer, and then it trickles that store to all the components inside. So anyway, so this runs first, right? And they populate the state, right? The state is either going to be, it's going to check for this type, because this state, because this has executed before we had a chance to click on any button, right? We haven't even rendered our component, so nobody has actually clicked on any button. So the only way we come in here is before we even know what the type of this action is, right? So definitely it's not base. At most it's undefined, right? And so this would be that's why it would be 9, right? And then you click on when you click on dummy twice, and it clicks, and it's base twice, right? So that it increments it by 2, so it becomes from 9, it goes up to 11. Okay, so that's 9 and 11. Okay. All right, let's do another one. Consider the following code snippet, which has no syntax error, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's see. We have, which of the buttons above updates the state of the component using best practices? Okay. All right, so we have A, B, and C. So let's look at differences between A, B, and C. It looks like both A, B, and C, or all 3 of them, are using onClick. They all call this dot something, and they all call 3 different functions. So here's the first function, here's the second, here's the third function. Okay, so A, B, and C looks like they're all doing the same thing, right? EWQ is, what is it doing? It's changing the state by directly, right? Saying, look at the initial state instead of a class component, and it's incrementing this dot state dot event. So it's changing this from 10 to 11. So if I click on A, it would change this to 11. And this one is doing the same thing, right? But instead it's using this dot set state. And what it's doing is saying it's changing the event to be whatever the old event was plus 1. So it also would change the state to 11, or the next value, right? So whatever the previous value was, plus 1. And this one is doing also this dot set state, but it's using previous state. See that? Previous state. And it's an updating event to be previous state dot event plus plus. Okay. And what this is trying to evaluate is that if you understand that if you are calculating the next state, right, using this dot set state, right, it is good practice to use this syntax. All 3 do the same thing, right? All 3 do the same thing, and 99.999% of the time, they all have the same exact behavior. Okay, you'd be very unlucky if it didn't have the same exact behavior. Okay. So most of the times you would not even care what to use, right? But the best practice is to use this one, okay? Because this one synchronizes and makes sure that the rendering engine is called at the right time, right? And that the state is synchronously updated, right? So this is the proper time, the proper syntax, right? You instead of directly updating, right, you instead ask for the previous state, and then you calculate the next state based on the previous state. So this is the proper thing. So the correct value is C, right? So button C. Here's another one. Consider the following code snippet with no syntax error. Okay, so we have presumably we're importing 4 components, A, B, C, and D. Presumably they are in 4 different files. A.js, B.js, C.js, and D.js. And we're rendering all four, and they all take a property message and says, so which of the following components definitions will display hello world? Select all that. So select all that apply. Let's see A. Let's see the difference between all three. Let's see. This is so export. So this is a class. This is a class, which is it's extending React.component, and here's render taking some arguments message, which we are then rendering here. Okay, so this is so we've never seen that syntax. Okay, render and then message. So that's incorrect. The only way that when we're using classes, the only way that we can pass parameters down to a class, right, as a property like that, as an attribute, is through properties. This dot properties, right? So definitely this is wrong. It's no good. Okay, so the other three seem to be using this dot props dot message. Actually, no, this one isn't. Okay, these two look like they're using this dot props dot message. Let's see. Let's look at this first one. Okay, so this one seems to be using a functional component. So in functional components, we don't use properties. We don't use this dot props. We use the property like that, right? So this dot props, that message doesn't apply in function. So that's no good either. Let's look at this one down below. We have export default blah 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 extends React.component render return this dot prompt. Okay, this one looks like it's promising. This one looks promising. This looks promising. Okay, so let's just try to remember that one. Can render not have any parameters? Nope, it's just an empty function. Yep. Then this one, what's different? What's wrong with this one? Import, React, export, default, message. Okay, this one looks promising as well, right? We're passing the attribute render. So I would choose these two. So these two render hello world. Which of the following components definition will display hello world? Okay, yeah, so those two. All right, so consider the code snippet below, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we're loading A, B, C, and D. And let's see, it's a class component. It defines a hello function, which takes in a message parameter, and we alert it. And then we have A, B, C, and D, all of them receiving a reference, right, of this dot hello, meaning this function here. Okay, and they all have a reference, and they all have this attribute hello. So it says, which of the following components definitions successfully pop up on alert box when their buttons are clicked? Okay, so let's see. Let's see. We have this one, right, which is it's a function component, which presumably is the reference to the function. Let's see. There's a question on the chat. I believe it comes from component, and that does not have parameter defined. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a render is a function that we inherit from the React.component. Yep, it takes no arguments. Yeah, so we are receiving the hello function here, and we have the button here, and we're going to click it. And if we click it, there's our hello, and we pass the attribute. We pass the string hello. So notice that this would put us in an infinite loop, right? Because it's not inside it's not inside of a closure, right? An opening close parentheses and then an arrow function, right? So this is no good. All right, the second one is a React component, and it has a button function. And to call it, we can call our hello, which has been passed in as an attribute, and we can have an access to it through the this.props hello. Right, so this looks promising. This looks like it would work. Let's look at this one. It says this is a functional component, same thing, a button. And notice that this one does put it inside of a closure, right, with an arrow function. So this one looks promising as well. And this one is a React component. The second, wouldn't the second infinite loop, the second, this one here? Oh, yes, yes, thank you. This was not in a, it's not in an arrow function. Yes, number 2 would also go into an infinite loop. Very good. So these first two go into an infinite loop. So the only, yeah, exactly. So this one is basically testing to see if you understand whether it should be inside of a closure or not. And also, why do so what happens is that when you call up here, so this calls these functions here, right? And so because you're changing something on the parent, right, it causes the children to re-render, and if they re-render, right, they're going to call again, which causes the parent to re-render, and the parent then, because the parent re-renders, then the children have to re-render. So it starts going up, into this infinite loop. Right. So whereas this one, because when you declare it like this, when you declare this, right, this is evaluated immediately. The default behavior in JavaScript is that if you have a function, it evaluates and runs it immediately, right? And so this would be invoked immediately. Whereas when you put it in a closure, and when you put it inside a function, you are postponing the execution, right? You're getting a reference to a function, but it is not invoked immediately. Option D seems using B as a component name would it cause problems since we've already had a class B. We have already class B. What do you mean? So this is D, and this is B, right? They're just being imported, right, independently from each other. B and D, so they're being independently imported. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So which of the following options sets X to 2? Okay, select all that apply. Let's see, question says, why don't the class ones need a constructor with super? Yeah, no, you don't need it. Only if you need to do something with props, then you would have to overwrite the constructor. And if you do overwrite it, you have to call super props. Right, so by default, you're getting that for free, right? You would only declare the constructor, right, if you need to do additional things with the properties. Like for instance, you would want to initialize your state, right, from properties that are being passed in the constructor. But we're not doing any of that. Okay, so here we have A. So we want to set X. We want to set X to 2. Okay, so here's A. A is an object that has 2 attributes, attribute B and C, with value 1 and 2. And then X is being equal to A dot C. Okay, so this one sets the value of X to 2. Let's look at the second one. Now we're saying that A is equal to B and C, again, same values, 1 and 2. And we are dynamically setting a brand new attribute D whose value is 2, and we're setting X to A.D. So this one also sets the value to 2. Okay. This one is setting the value of A, same thing. We're setting the value of A.D equal to C. And then we're saying A.D, which is C, and then A.C sub C is equal to 2. So this one also changes the value of X to 2. So this one's just testing you whether you understand that in JavaScript, arrays, right, can be used as indexes, not only into arrays. So the square brackets, right, can be used as for indexing arrays, if you're using just the numerals, or you can also use strings, right, to use indices into objects, right, so that you can use them as maps. Okay, so yeah, in JavaScript you can arrays are only a special case of an object whose indices are numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, and they're incrementing like that. But in you can absolutely use square brackets for for indices, right, into objects like this, right? Also, in JavaScript, the dot notation and the square bracket notations are interchangeable, right? So this a and then square brackets with a string, right? That can also be written as a dot d. So a dot d and a square brackets string d, right, are equivalent. Okay, so this a dot d and this a square brackets d are equivalent to each other. Okay, so let's see. Here's another example of another puzzle, right? So here we are loading components A, B, C, and D, and we are invoking these, right? So presumably these are functions declared down below. We have A, B, C, and D declared down below here. And so we're invoking A with 2 and 3, B with 2 and 3. So we're invoking all of them with the same values, 2 and 3. And in those functions, right, we have declared A, B, C, and D. Notice that these have not been exported, so it would be a syntactical error. But again, assume that these have been declared correctly and everything's dandy. I'll make sure to eliminate that confusion. Right, these should be, export, right, const B, yada yada yada, export const A, blah 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 blah. But if you find errors like that, you should ignore them, right? Unless the question is explicitly asking, your understanding of exports, it'll be obvious. Okay, it'll be obvious that what it is that is being asked. Anyway, so we have here, which of the following functions definitions used are correctly defined? Select all that apply. So here's function A. We're calling 2 and 3. So here's A, 2 and 3, and it's returning A plus B. Okay, that's perfect. There's nothing wrong with that. It comes back with 2 plus 3 is 5. So this value is to 5. Let's see B. B says I'm also taking the values of A and B, and there's a curly bracket, right? There's a curly bracket, which I'm explicitly returning A plus B. So this is an implicit return, whereas this is an explicit return. Okay, so basically this is testing whether you understand explicit returns and implicit returns. Yes. This one is it's C taking 2 parameters. Okay, but notice that it has no parentheses. There's no parentheses, and that's a syntax error. Okay, and I know I said that obviously I'm not explicitly making you should ignore syntax errors, but obviously the question here, right? If you see the comparisons, right? I'm basically asking you, is this correct or is this correct? Right? And if you look at the difference, right, one is missing the parentheses, whereas the other one has the parentheses. So obviously, this one's actually asking you, do you know your syntax? Is it okay to leave out the parentheses? And it's not, right? Only if you have a single parameter, then it's okay to leave out the parentheses, right? But if you have more than one parameter, then the parentheses are required. Okay. Same thing. This return, it's being compared against this one, right? So what's the difference between B and D, right? The only difference is that one has a parenthesis, curly brackets, and the other one doesn't. Okay. So basically, this is asking you, is it okay to leave out the curly bracket? And it's not. It's not okay to leave out the curly brackets, right? So these two are okay, and these two are not okay. Okay, so which of the following options sets map 1 to 2, 8, 18, and 32? Okay, so this one is asking you whether you understand the function, the mapped function, right? So here's an array that has values 1, 4, 9, and 16. And then we have the value map 1 is the result of mapping over that array. Okay, so notice that in all cases, we're mapping over array 1. See that? And so the first one is using the old ES5 syntax of using the keyword function. Okay, and in this case, we're saying, take the value of, so iterate over array 1, and as you iterate, right, the values will be bound to parameter x, right? It'll call a function and pass you the value of each one of the values in the map, and then what map does is that it'll accumulate, it'll concatenate all the values these internal function returns, right? And what are we returning? We are returning, right, x times 2. So if it's 1, it'll return 2. If it's 4, it'll return 8. If it's 9, it'll return 18, which is basically the results of map 1. See that? So this one looks promising. It looks like this one is doing what it's supposed to do. What about this down below? So is this one okay, right? Notice that the difference between these two is that this one is missing the return and this one is not. And so this is asking you, is it okay to leave out the return? Now, normally it would be if this were ES6, but it's not ES6 because you have a function in there, right? So even though you have like an arrow here, right, you have the function keyword there, and that's no good, right? This is kind of like a mixture of EF5 and ES6. And there's a question here: does a semicolon matter at the end of each function? No. Well, unless you have multiple, if you have multiple lines, then yes, right? But here we only have one line of code. So this is kind of like a mixture of ES5 syntax with ES6 syntax. So this is no good, right? So that's what's no good. So this one's promising. Let's keep an eye on that one. The second one, this one is straight ES6 syntax, right? Straight ES6 syntax, right? This is an implied return. Notice that we're dropping the parentheses around x because it's a single parameter, which is totally fine. And this one is evaluating to x times 2. That's perfect ES6 syntax. So that one's good too. How about this one? So this one, notice that it's the difference between the two is that this one has an explicit return. Now, for explicit returns to work, you have to have the curly brackets. Otherwise, that's a syntax error. Right? So this one is okay because we do have the curly brackets and we do have a return. Right? So all three, all the answers except for the one in the middle, right, is wrong. I'm sorry. All are right except the one in the second one, right? The second one is the one that's wrong, but all the other ones are okay. Doesn't Q12 only take one right answer since the bubbles on the left are circles? Oh, yeah, this should be a select all. Yeah, this is supposed to be apply all. This is supposed to be apply all. You're right. Thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure that it's the correct types of question. So for question 12, both A, B, and C. No. B is no good. Oh wait, question 12. Yeah, no. A, C, and D are good. Okay, B is no good. Okay, so 13. Consider the code snippet. So we have customer. It's an object named foo, and then we have card with 3 attributes. Right? We have amount, product, and unit price. And then we have here we have a string template. See, this has a backtick here. See that it has a backtick. Okay, that means that we can embed in here. We can embed expressions. Okay, and presumably we're going to be using customer and card to embed inside here, right? So fill in the blanks to display the message below. Hello, Foo. Want to buy 10 bar for a total of $1,000, right? So hello, Foo. Okay, foo is inside of customer. So presumably it would be $ curly bracket name.foo. I'm sorry, customer.name, right? So customer.name. So this number 1 would be I think I'm asking for the curly brackets. When I say find the blanks, fill in the blanks to display the message below. Note the backticks around the text above. Use ES6 new string template, literal syntax we've used in class and assignments. Do not use string concatenation and do not use extra spaces. Hello, foo, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so I'm expecting you to do the whole thing, $, curly bracket, right? Customer.name would be for the first one. For the second one would be, says one to buy and then 2. So 10. So 10 would be card. So $, curly brackets, amount, right? I mean, card.amount would be for number 2, right? And then, so 10 bar, right? Bar would be card.product is the bar for a total of 4, right? 4 is 1,000. So 1,000 comes from multiplying 10 times 100. So it would be curly bracket, $, curly bracket, card.amount times card.unit price. Although if you would have typed in there, curly bracket, $, curly bracket, 1,000, that would have been fine as well. Or 10 times 100 would have been fine as well. Okay, so question number 14. Which of the following options sets C to 6? So C is equal to 6. So we're multiplying, we're passing times with 2 and 3. So this one is times, so 2 times 3, that's 6. So that looks promising. And this one looks like a copy of the first one. So this was probably a, this was probably a typo. This is probably a typo. And actually, there's probably a typo, right? Yeah, this twice makes no sense. What about this one? This returns 2 times 3. That's also 6. And oh no, but that's wrong. So notice that it has no parentheses here, right? So that's wrong. And here we're using curly brackets for the parameters, so that's wrong as well. So it would be either one of these two, I guess. Right. In the exam, we'll make sure that you only get one choice. Let's see, number 15, which says consider the following array: spray, limit, elite, exuberance, blah, 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 blah. Which of the following options sets the results to exuberant, destruction, present? Okay, so this is, all right, so notice that they're all going through some words dot something. See that? Words dot map, words dot find, words dot filter. So this was testing you whether you understand how these functions work, right? There's dot array, dot map, dot find, dot filter, and so they're all, so map, as we know, map concatenates all the values that this is returned. So notice that this is not returning anything. Well, it's returning a true or false, right? So basically you would end up with a result with a whole bunch of trues and falses, right? Find returns the object or the element that meets this criteria, right? The first element that meets the criteria. So for the first word whose length is greater than 6, right, would be returned. And this is not what we want. We want an array of things, right? So this one looks like it's correct one. It's filter. Filter iterates over the array and only keeps the elements that meet that criteria. So if this is true, I'll keep it. Otherwise, I won't keep it. Right. So basically, notice that it's dropping elite, it's dropping limit, it's dropping spray because they're too short. Right. Their length is not greater than 6. So I only keep exuberant, destruction, and present. Right, which is what we want here. So the last one. Consider the following array. So here's parameters and an array hello, true, and 7. It says which of the following options creates a new array called other. Let's see, words.map in parentheses. It should return the objects. Is this correct? So words.map in parentheses, it should return the object. Is this correct? Return the object. Here it's returning whatever here we're returning, right? We're returning right here. See that? We're returning whether this is true or false, right? So what you would end up is in result, you would end up an array of this length where it would say false, 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 true, true, true. That would be the end of that result. That's a great question for the midterm. Thank you. Maybe that'll come up in the midterm. What's the difference between find and filter? It is this one, the last one, right? For this one, right? But the question, there's a question saying which is the difference between the two. So find returns a single result, right? It returns the word, right, that meets this criteria. So the first one, right, this one would return exuberant, right? Because it's the first word that retrieves, is the first word for which this is true, right? So it would return exuberant. So results would be exuberant, right? And doesn't filter eliminate the ones that fits the condition? Filter returns the values for which this is true, right? So here, so if it's false, then it does not keep it, right? So it filters out the ones who make this expression false. If it makes it true, then it keeps that element. All right, so consider the following, blah, blah, blah. But find all also would be correct. Find all, we don't have find all. Yeah, we don't have find all. Oh, you mean if we would have used find all? Yes, correct. Very good. Yep. Yes. All right, so this one's checking to see if you understand the spreader function, right? The spreader operator. And so here we have an initial array, and then it says which of the following options creates a new array called other. So here's other, okay, which contains 1 and 2 as the first two elements, right? And then followed by a copy of the contents of param. So basically 1, 2, hello, true, 7, right? So this one looks promising. That one looks promising. And the way it's doing it, right, it's because it's notice the spreader operator there. See that? Right? That's basically what it's doing, is that it's copying all the content of the params at the end. So this one's the answer, right? So definitely not the plus, right? That looks like a concatenation, and that's not valid. Comma params. So what this would do is that it would create a subarray instead of other, right? So you would have 1, 2, and then an array, a subarray that contains hello, true, 7, but not, right, as first elements inside of the other array. Okay. Which of the following options sets the background color of the heading below? Okay, so these all have headings, right? Headings. And so the first one is using the style. It says H1 followed by blue, background blue. So here's H1 and there's style blue. Okay, so not this one, right? Because this says that I am applying it to, so this says I apply to an element whose name is blue that comes after H1. So H1, there would be an element called H1, and then would be another element embedded under there called blue, and then we would change the background to blue. But that's not what we have here, right? We have an element H1 whose style attribute is blue, right? So this does not match that. How about this one over here? So this one says I'm changing all the H1s to blue, right? So this would change H1 to blue, right? Right? Doesn't matter what class. Well, unless that class would override somehow, but we don't know that, right? We don't know that. This one changes the H1 and H1 whose ID is blue, right? Changes the color to blue. But so it does not apply to this one because this is changing, it has a class blue, but not an ID blue. And this one says change the H1 whose class is blue, but it doesn't apply to this one because we have the ID equal to blue, not the class, right? So neither one of these works. That one doesn't work either. So the only one left is this one. Okay, so again, this is testing whether you understand how classes and IDs are used as selectors, right, to change the look and feel of a specific element. So which of the following is the best practice to change the color of a paragraph below? Disregard syntax errors. Okay, so we're being asked about best practice. So probably a lot of these do the same exact thing, right? They all accomplish the same thing, but you have to choose which one is the best practice or not. Okay, so let's look at this one. All right, so this says, take the paragraph, lorem ipsum, and change the style to be red. Okay, so we're changing the color of the paragraph. Okay, that changes the color of the paragraph, right? And it changes to red. That's fine. I mean, fine, that works. How about this one? This says, okay, grab me the, all the elements whose ID is red. Well, there should be only one, right? And change the color to be red. So this one also changes the color of the paragraph to be red. So these both changed the color to be red. Okay, let's look at another one. How about this one? This says, here's a paragraph, and we're loading a file called styles.css, and in that file, we are changing the paragraph to color red. Okay, so all three options are changing the color red, right? Now, which one should we choose? How about this one over here? We're using style, right? And we're saying P color red. Okay, so this one's also changing the color red. How about this one? This is changing the paragraph to red. Okay, so they all do the same thing, right? But one of them is using an ID. The other one is using a class. The other one is changing all the paragraphs to red, right? And this one is using the style attribute, right? So there's a style attribute where we're seeing 3 style tags and basically 1 using link. Okay, if you remember, I said many times, right, that using the style attribute is considered bad practice, right? It makes it a maintenance nightmare, right? That that I can't override from outside of the component. I can't override it, and so you're forcing me as a developer to go in there and actually manipulate this element, right? And that everybody's going to hate you for it. Something that's a little bit better, but not that much better, is to use instead these style attributes, right? Because at least you have a single place of maintenance for the whole page, right? So at least I just have one single place that I need to modify all the styles for everybody else, okay? But absolutely the best is to always declare all your styling outside in a separate file, okay? Where we can then override any changes, right, globally, so that we don't have to go into and open up a file, specific file. So there's a question on the chat. Wouldn't the middle one change all the paragraphs to red? So this one, yes, it would. Yep, it would. Still, choosing the file is absolutely the best option. You would never use a style attribute or a style tag. When you want to use a class name, yes, but absolutely never use style. So that's the fact that I might have had a syntax error on a style sheet, okay, file, okay, that's a different issue. But absolutely never use style attributes or the style tag. Okay, that's more for maintenance nightmare. So what does URL stand for? So universal resource locator. What does www stand for? World Wide Web. What does REST stand for? And what is it? Oh man, what is? Okay, well, we haven't looked at REST yet, but State transfer, representational state transfer, representational state transfer. We will look at the rest a little later, actually maybe on Wednesday. What does SPA stand for? Single page applications, JSON, JavaScript, object notation, CSS, cascading style sheets, HTML, hypertext markup language, hypertext transfer protocol. So make sure you know your acronyms. Okay. All right. So a state to property mapping function generates the new state of a component dispatcher. That is absolutely hard to read, and it's absolutely false. Right, so it's false. A dispatch to property mapper function maps functions to a component's property. Yes, the functions dispatch actions to the reducer. Yep, that's exactly. Really love these stand for questions. What is this? Oh, I'm glad you love them. So here's an example. Okay, this is a REST question, which we haven't looked at REST just yet. We're going to be looking at REST on Wednesday. So let's skip over that. Consider the following question. Okay, this is another REST question. We're not going to look at that. That's RESTful, no rest, no rest. That's REST again. Rest, blah, 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 blah. No rest questions. Which of the following is a required property of the action objects, right, in a reducer? So the action object needs to have the type attribute, right? And there's no rest on the exam. No rest in the exam. It's all work, work, work. What is type actually required or just very helpful? No, it's all actually required. The compiler will complain if you do not pass the type attribute. Match the left-hand side options with the right-hand side descriptions. Wrong answer. Okay, so we'll give you several, drop downs and ask you what does provider mean, what does connect do, what create store, what reducer does. Okay. Oh, that's it. Right, that's it. That is the midterm review. Any questions? No questions. Okay. All right. If there are no questions, then I would love to then introduce the upcoming assignment. Let's see. Let's take a look at the upcoming assignments. So in the what we've been working on for the last couple months, right, is an online learning management system that allows us to, for faculty, allows us to create content. And what you've been building is the course management portion and the and also the course editor. Okay. And for all of them, you've been using my generic server, right? That has been failing as of late. You've been using our, my server to store data, right? So now it's time for you to create your own server, right? And to store your own data, right? So we're going to be learning the next several weeks. We're going to learn on how we can create our own servers. Okay, there's a question in the chat. Jose, have you pushed all the lessons code? I believe I have. Yes, I believe I have pushed everything. So you should be able to, you should be all set there. Okay, so this assignment introduces on how is that we're going to be able to create our own services. Okay, you'll be creating one from scratch. We're going to be using the same Java server that we started using at the beginning of the semester? Is rest on the exam? No, rest is not on the exam. Rest is not on the exam. We're going to be using the same server that we started using way at the beginning of the semester, where we created a couple of static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Well, actually, we use jQuery, right? Yeah, so we're going to be using that same server, but right, we're going to be using mostly as a data server, right? We're not going to be using it, to render any content. We're still going to be using React.js to do all our front end development, but we're going to be connecting to your Java server to retrieve data. Okay. So first, you can create a RESTful service for storing widgets. If you remember, what we're implementing, we are navigating from courses to modules, then to lessons, and then to topics, and then we're going to add widgets. We're going to add widgets down below. Okay, there's a question on the chat. Is the exam open book? Yes, the exam is open book. Yeah, I had to make it open book because there's no way for me to guarantee that you're not going to be opening books, or that you're going to have access to all the slides and all the internet where you can search for everything, right? So right, to discourage folks from collaborating with one another, right? The exam will be, you're gonna have lots of random questions, right? So no two exams will be identical, right? So they'll be slightly different. So you'll probably waste more time trying to see if two questions are similar, so that so ideally, right, everybody's going to be working on their own, right, and using your own wits. Okay, so we're going to be implementing the following, right? Right now, you have a client application that you implement using React, using components, and you have been creating these React service clients that have been connecting to my generic server. But from now on, you're going to be connecting to your own server, which you're going to be implementing your own Java server. Actually, you're going to be connecting to two servers. You're going to still be connecting to my server to fetch the courses, the modules, the lessons, the topics. But for the widgets, right, instead of going out to my server, you're going to go out to your own server, right? So you're going to be hitting two servers at the same time, right? Mine for half of the material, and to your server for the other content. Okay. So first of all, you're gonna be implementing a Java object, a Java class that is gonna hold all your data, right? So widgets basically are, when you're in Canvas, right? When you're in Canvas and you have modules on the left hand side, right? You have these modules, and then you can add inside of a module, right? You can add different things, right? You can say plus, and these are all the different types of widgets that you can add. You can add a quiz, you can add a file, you can add a page, you can have a text header, you can add a URL, you can add a tool or something, right? So then it renders like these widgets, right? That can be moved around, they can be dragged, they can remove them. So we're gonna do the same thing, right? Once in our course manager or course editor, sorry, we have chosen the module, the lessons, and the topics. Below the topics, we're going to render all sorts of widgets, right? And in there, faculty, for instance, could put up a video, right? That like a lecture. They could put like a little quiz so you can answer a question. They could put a poll, right? They could maybe embed slides, or maybe an image, or it could be just raw HTML, right? That maybe we'll later on we'll use an HTML editor so that folks can actually type in just HTML. Okay, so first we're going to be playing around with really simple widgets, trivial widgets like this one over here. See that in Canvas you can create a header. See that, like a text header, where you can say, these are the lectures, right? and there it is. See that? Then you have like a header, like a header, right, of content that you can move around up and down. So we're gonna be implementing a header, and we're gonna be implementing a paragraph widget, right? Paragraph, that's easy, right? It's just text with a paragraph, opening and closing paragraph. And a header, headers are actually a little more challenging because headers can be different sizes, right? And you need to be able to configure the header, right? You have to say, oh, what size you want, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So the widget object is going to be implemented as a Java class, and it's going to have the following attributes: name that you can give an attribute. It's going to have a unique identifier ID. The type of the widget. This is where the widget will know whether it should render as a heading, as a paragraph, as a YouTube widget, as an HTML, raw HTML. Also, the order allows you to establish, if you can move widgets up and down, right? So you can establish, well, where should the widget appear, right? Relative to all the sibling widgets. And any text content of the widget, maybe the label of a heading, or maybe the paragraph text, size, width and height. So all these are different properties that all widgets should have. Okay. All right. So then we're going to have a widget service. So widget service, and again, we'll talk about this more when we talk about RESTful services, but it's basically where you capture all the data, or at least where you manage the access to the data, right? Our data for now, widgets are just going to be an array, right? It's going to be an array of widgets. And right now we're going to either create new widgets and push into this new array of widgets, or we're going to maybe delete from this array of widgets, or we're going to update an existing object in this array of widgets, or maybe we can retrieve all the widgets for a given topic, right? So to handle all that creation and updates and deletes, we're going to have these functions. So create a widget, find a widget, update a widget, delete a widget, and they're all going to live inside of widget service.java. Okay, so it's gonna maintain the data, and this for now the data is just going to be an array of objects, right? The week after that, right, we're going to introduce how really we want to store that in a database, right? Either in a relational database or a non-relational database, but a relational database nonetheless. Right, but that's later, right? For now, for this assignment, we're just going to do an array, right? We're just learning about REST. How is it that how we can communicate between the client React application and a backend. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. How would you define a widget? So a widget is a graphical, right? It's a graphical representation that you can position somewhere on the screen. So it's a generic UI component. Right? It could be as simple as an input field, right? That's a widget. It could be a date picker. That's a widget, right? And so, or it could be as complex, right, as a list of elements. So a widget, it's a UI component elements, right, that you can position on a page. Okay, and you can have all sorts of different things that you can drag and drop onto the page, right? You can have YouTube videos or slides, or maybe a link to somewhere else. Those are all types of widgets. Okay, so it's a generic UI component element. Okay, so yeah, so the web service allows you to create, update, delete, and manipulate widgets. Then the so that data manipulation needs to be available to the rest of the world, right, on the web, right? Because we have our REST application. I'm sorry, our React application that is doing all the rendering, right, interacting with the user. So it needs to go fetch all these widgets, right, from some data source, yes? And the data right now is going to live inside of a Java server. And that Java server has the data, available through this service, this widget service, right? This widget service has all the, it has all the functions that allow you to access or create or update the data. So we need to make this available to the rest of the world, okay? Available at certain URLs, okay? And that's where the controller comes in. The controller makes these functions available at some URL so that we can then either create data and then invoke these functions that actually create the data or remove the data, right? So for instance, to create new widgets, we're going to map it to slash topics, the ID of the topic, and then widgets. So that's posts. So post in the RESTful world means create new data. Whereas in the RESTful world, get means read data, retrieve data. Okay, so we're gonna have a create widget, right? Create widgets, oops. Create widgets, retrieve widgets, right? Or update widgets. Put in the RESTful world means to update something, and delete means to, as you guessed it, right? It means remove data from the service. Okay. All right, so that's all the work on the server side, on the Java side, right? We need a data model to represent all widgets. We need a service that allows us to manipulate the data model, right? Add, remove, create, do all the CRUD operations. And then we need a controller that exposes that behavior to the rest of the world through HTTP endpoints. Yes? Because that's all the middle tier, right? The Java server. Then on the React side, now we need to talk to this brand new server that we just created, right? For that, right, we're going to create a widget service. Just like we created a lesson service, a module service, a core service, this is going to look very, very similar. Okay. The difference is that whereas all the services you've written so far, they connect to my generic server, this brand new service that you're going to be writing is not going to be using my generic server. Instead, it's going to be using your server, right? The server that you just wrote. Okay, it's going to have the same types of functions in there as all the other ones, right? It's going to have create something, find, update, delete, the same kinds of functions, but instead of going out to the generic server, it's going to go out to your server, right? You're going to be posting not to my server, you're going to be posting to your server. Instead of doing gets to my server, you're going to be doing gets to your server, right? Instead of doing updates and deletes to my server, you're going to be doing updates and delete to your server. Okay, you're going to own this. And then once you have that working, right, you're going to actually create a React component that is going to render a list of widgets. It's going to go out and say, well, give me all the widgets for topic number 1, 2, 3, right? Or give me some other list of widgets for topic 2, 3, 4, right? It's going to retrieve those widgets, and then it's going to render them. Right? It's going to just iterate over the widgets and render them. So just like modules iterates over a list of modules, right? And just like lessons iterate over a list of lessons, here you're going to iterate over an array of widgets. Okay, so now these widgets can be edited, just like modules can be edited, right? Modules can be edited, lessons can be edited, and the way we edit it is by clicking on the pencil, right? It toggles, right? It toggles between, right, the actual text, right, or the input field. Here, the editing is going to be a little bit more challenging. Here to edit, right? Here's the text for our heading. If we click on the cog, it switches to an editing edit mode where we can type the text for the header. You can say the size of the header, right? Heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. You can also change the type of the widget, because the widgets, again, widgets can be of different types of widgets, right? A paragraph widget could be a heading widget, could be a YouTube widget. And you can either remove the widget or you can say save the widget, and then it saves to the server. If you want a new widget, you can click on plus, right? And then it just adds more widgets at the bottom. Okay. So that's the heading widget. Or it could be a paragraph widget. The paragraph widget renders just like a paragraph. Okay. But when you edit it, when you click on the cog, right, it changes to this the type of the field, right? It also changes to like a text area where you can type, long form, long text. And so these drop downs here allow you to select the widget, and these are the types of widgets we're going to be working on later. For this week, right, we're going to be doing heading and paragraph, heading and paragraph. Later on, we'll take a look at more challenging widgets like videos, right, HTML plugins, blah blah blah. This one goes into a little more detail on the paragraph widget. It tells you where to implement them, right? Implement them in this directory, in this file. Okay, so please implement them where we are asking you to implement them. And here's the heading widget, right? It goes into detail on where to implement the heading widget. Okay, and it looks like so. You'll need a reducer, right? So create a reducer for the widget, right? So that you can handle things such as create widget, delete widget, update widget, right? Find all widgets, and so on and so forth. Okay. All right, that's the new assignments, and we'll get you started on Wednesday. Right, we'll come back and get you started there then. Any questions? All right, folks. Thank you.
Professor, I just had one quick question, if you're
Yes.
available for a minute. Yeah, I was just trying to create a new lesson for a particular module from Postman. And in the body, I was sending the key as title, and it returned me an object without the title present. So am I doing something wrong?
Probably.
So it's expected